الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. To proceed. So in today's lesson, inshallah ta'ala, we will discuss the next subject, which is al-af'alu, or the verbs. Okay? Now, there are three types of verbs in Arabic. Okay, yes, relating to tense. So there's al-fi'l al-madi, the past tense. Okay, al-fi'l al-mudari'u, the present tense, and al-fi'l al-amr, the command form, which relates to when you're giving a command to a person, whether you're speaking to a single male, female, or a group. So the one that we're going to do in today's lesson is the first and the easiest type, which is al-fi'l al-madi. Okay. Al-fi'l al-madi. So al-fi'l al-madi means the verb or the action, al-madi, the past. So it relates to an action which is connected to a period of time, which in simple terms it relates to something that you did in the past and has ended. So we'll begin with one of our favorite verbs that inshallah ta'ala we all know, which is he wrote, which Muhammad is
Kataba.
Kataba. Right. Kataba is he wrote. Okay, and what we'll do, just so we remember, we will write he wrote. Now, the first point to note that in dictionaries, when you read the meaning of verbs, and similarly when people write about them, so they will write, for example, kataba, and they'll say that it means to write, which isn't correct, because literally it means he wrote. Okay, and we use it to mean he wrote kataba, right? But when they translate it to write, although it gives a meaning of the action which is writing, it doesn't specifically relate it to the third person, him, he. And we need to understand that. That's important. Once you've mastered the different forms of the verbs, then you can relate to or refer to it as to write, and it doesn't matter. But right now we need to understand that kataba means he wrote. Okay? So it's al-fi'lu, it's the verb kataba. And remember, we said there are three types of words in Arabic. There is al-fi'lu, the verb. Then there's the ismun, al-ismu, the noun. And then there's a third type, which is al-harfu, the harf or the letter. So this is one of the three types, kataba. And unlike an ismun, remember we said that an ismun can be in one of three states: marfu'un with a dhamma, mansubun with a fatha. We're going to have to learn that mark, fatha, or majrurun with a kasra, right? We learned that, didn't we? But with regards to verbs or al-af'alu is the plural. Okay, al-af'alu is the plural for al-fi'lu. With regards to al-af'alu, verbs, they don't change like that. Remember, those three states for the time being are specific to nouns. As far as verbs, they are fixed. So the way that kataba is written now, it's always kataba, irrespective of where it is in the sentence. Right? So, kataba means he wrote. And they say that it's mabniyun ala fath. It's fixed because it ends with this fatha, and it's, as I said, it's always like that. So that is kataba. Now, to give the other forms of the verb, we need to add something to the end. Right? Now, there are 12 different forms of the verb, and we're not going to mention them all. Right? Because if you mention them all, then it can become confusing, and it's very important that the ones that we introduce, the first person, or the single, the individual, that you memorize them. Very important. So kataba is he wrote. In order to say she wrote, we have to add something to the end. So it becomes katabat. Right? Katabat, she wrote. Okay? So kataba is he wrote, katabat is she wrote. And note that we've added a ta with a sukoon on the end. Right? So kataba he wrote, katabat she wrote. Then I wrote is, anyone know? Right. Katabtu is I wrote. So as we can see that the ending here now has a ta with a dhamma on. Right? That's all that's happened. We've added to the end. So we start with kataba. Then we moved to katabat, so we added the ta with the sukoon, and it became she wrote. If we added the ta with the dhamma, it becomes I wrote. Okay? So I wrote, you wrote, single male is?
Katabta.
Right. Katabta becomes you wrote, a single male. You wrote, single male. Right? So again, we just added the ta with the fatha on the end. So next is you wrote, single female, which is?
Katabti.
Right. Katabti. It is you wrote, single female. Right, so kataba he wrote, katabat she wrote, katabtu I wrote, katabta you wrote, single male, katabti you wrote, single female. And the other one that we'll mention is we wrote for the time being. Right, so we wrote is?
Katabna.
Katabna. Katabna. Like that. So we've added a noon with a fatha and an alif on the end, and it becomes katabna, we wrote. So we wrote and I wrote is the same whether we're speaking about a male or a female. So if we say katabtu I wrote, that could be I wrote a single male or I wrote a single female. It's the same. Similarly, katabna we wrote, it's whether it's a group of males or a group of females. Right? So the third, the fi'l al-madi, the past tense verb, changes in this form. And the reason why we do the past tense first is because it's the easiest of the three. Why? Because the way that it changes is always the same. The ending The way that the ending changes with a ta and a sukoon for she and tu for I and so on and so forth is always the same regardless of what the verb is. That's why it's easy to learn. Right? So, if we apply that rule therefore to another verb. So, Muhammad. Sorry?
I thought you wanted a verb. Do you want a verb?
Yeah, give us a verb. Ghassala. And what does ghassala mean?
He washed.
He washed. So Muhammad, ghassala is he washed. How do you say she washed?
Ghassalat.
Ghassalat. I washed. How do you say I washed?
Ghassaltu.
Ghassaltu. You washed, single male.
Ghassalta.
Right. You washed, single female.
Ghassalti.
We washed.
Ghassalna.
Good. Right. So we know that ghassala, even though it's a different verb but with a different meaning, the way that it changes is exactly the same as kataba. Right? So if we take another verb, Rajan, another verb please. Any verb.
I don't know.
Well, an English one then. And then Muhammad will tell you the Arabic.
Say anything in English.
Darasa. He studied, because that's what we're doing, right? We're studying Arabic. Darasa. Darasa. Darasa, right. So Rajan, how do we say he studied?
He studied.
That one's easy, because it's on the board.
And he studied.
Yes.
As it is.
As it is. Darasa, right? She studied.
Darasta.
Darasat.
Darasa.
I studied.
Darastu.
Darastu. You studied single male.
Darasta.
You studied single female.
Darasti.
We studied.
We studied. Darasna.
Good. Darasna. See? It's really quite straightforward once you've mastered how to change one verb. Right, so the last one, akhlaq.
Daraba.
Daraba. Right, so what does daraba mean? Right. So daraba, it means he hit, or it means,
Strike.
well, that's another synonym for he hit, or it means to mention an example. For example, the ayah, Daraballahu mathalan, that happens frequently in Al-Quran, that particular expression, Daraballahu mathalan, right? Allah mentions or puts forward a mathalan, an example, right? So daraba can also mean to mention, and then you would say example for example. Right, so daraba is he hit, she hit is
Darabat.
darabat, I hit,
Darabtu.
darabtu, you hit single male,
Darabta.
you hit single female,
Darabti.
we hit,
Darabna.
darabna. Right, that's fine. So MashaAllah, you were able to conjugate 3 different verbs according to the same pattern. So it's very important, what I always say, is that this first form of a verb, because there are 10 forms of verbs in Arabic, but we mention that later on in more detail, because at the beginning it's not really helpful when you're a learner. But there are 10 forms. This is the first form, right? It's said that this form, where you have 3 letters, it's said that this first form is on the pattern of fa'ala. Fa'ala means he did. Right? Fa'ala means he did. Now, all Arabic words are based upon this triliteral root system, meaning that all of them will go back, all words, asma'ul nouns, will go back to a particular verb. They'll be derived from it. So for example, fa'ala means he did. What's the word for verb? Fi'lun. Right? So it's from the same root. Fi'lun. Similarly, kataba is he wrote. The word for book is?
Kataba.
The word for book?
Kitabun.
Kitabun. Right? It's the same three letters. Kataba. Similarly, the word for desk is maktabun. The word for library is maktabatun. And so on and so forth. All of them relate back to the three letters which form the root of all of those verbs. Nouns. So collectively they're related in meaning. So it's very important to start thinking like that. That when you encounter a word such as a noun and you're not sure what the meaning is, try and identify what the root letters are and then refer it back to the meaning of a verb. Right? But we'll see more examples of that. So, are there any questions here now? We've understood that this is how we change a fi'l al-madi, past tense, which is the first of three types of verbs in Arabic, and it's consistent. It always changes in this form. Right? Is that clear, Arajan?
Yeah.
Akhlaq. Right, so if we carry on, therefore, we're going to relate it back now to our previous lesson, which was al-jumlatul fi'liyya, because of course we're dealing with al-fi'l al-madi, so we're going to relate it back to al-jumlatul fi'liyya. Now, in our jumlatul fi'liyya, we said it comprises of three parts, didn't we?
No.
What are those three parts?
فعل
Fi'lun,
فاعل
fa'ilun,
مفعول
maf'ulun bihi. So, let's take the example of a fi'lun. So, Akhlaq, give us an example of a fi'lun. It's always good to try and think of a new one because then you learn more and more words, right? Hadara. What does hadara mean? Hadara, attended. He attended. Hadara. Right? Hadara, and then we want to say, for example, the student attended the lesson. Hadara, the student, right? At-talibun Muhammad. At-talibun. Is that right? Hadara at-talibun?
Without a son?
No. First of all, what is at-talibu?
Did you take up one of those?
Oh,
Yes, Surajan. Did you?
No, I was saying.
Sorry, akhlaq. Yeah, I'm just going to move this up so it will all fit. Hadara. What's wrong with the talibun?
You gotta take one Dhamma
Why?
because it's got alif lam.
Right, yeah, Muhammad, you cannot say at-talibun. Never ever say at-talibun or al-kitabun. Never add tanweenul dammin to the end of an ism that begins with al, because it's a grammatical impossibility. You're making something definite and indefinite at the same time, and that's not possible. Right, so it's hadara at-talibu. Then we want to say the lesson. So how do we say the lesson? Right? Ad-dar.
sir.
Is it ad-darsu or ad-darsa?
Sir.
الدرس. Why Muhammad?
مفعول به is always منصوب.
Good. The maf'ulun bihi is always mansubun. That should be now imprinted on your brain. There are certain rules that must be memorized and then repeated back. The first of these is that in al-jumlatul fi'liya, it always begins with a fi'lun, which it does. Hadara. The second is that the fa'ilun, the doer, is always marfu'un. Right? The doer is always marfu'un. So it can never be at-taliba or at-talibi. Right? The third is that the maf'ulun bihi is always mansubun. And those three terms, marfu'un, mansubun, majrurun, you should now be familiar with them. Right, Rajan? Please say yes. It's very important. And do you remember I said at the beginning, because now we can just say, right, that word is marfu'un, and you understand what that means. So we don't have to keep explaining it again. Right? And we can say that the maf'ulun bihi is always mansubun. And you know it's always mansubun, meaning it's always going to end with a fatha. Right? So, in al-jumlatul fi'liya, it begins with a verb. And if the sentence is in the third person, meaning he or she or they, then it's always going to begin with the singular verb, such as hadara, he, right? If it's first person, such as katabtu, I, then you say katabtu I, right? That, which I know is obvious, but if it's we, then you say katabna. If I'm talking to you, I'd say katabta. But if we're talking about the third person, about somebody, right, we're going to begin with the singular, such as kataba or hadara, right? And that will explain why now. And the reason for that is because the fa'ilun here, which is the second part of al-jumlatul fi'liya, that is going to match the number that you're talking about. What does that mean? Well, what does hadara at-talib wa darsa mean?
He, the student, attended the lesson.
Right, he, the student, attended the lesson, which means the student attended the lesson. Today, we have more than one student attending the lesson. So we want to say, the students attended the lesson. Right? John? So, remember, if we want to express the students attended the lesson, then how are we going to begin? We're going to begin with a?
Singular.
What type of word are we going to begin with? We want to express the students attended the lesson. So we're going to begin with? Which word?
Hadara.
Hadara, right, good. We're going to begin with the fi'lun, right? Hadara.
Yeah.
Right? But, right, okay. So, then we want the students. What is the plural of at-talibu? Well, there are actually several, but we'll select one. At-tulabu. Huh? At-tulabu. Hadara at-tulabu, the lesson, ad-darsa. Right? Hadara at-tulabu ad-darsa. So now, what do we notice about this sentence? What does it mean?
The students attended the lesson.
Right. The students, which is at-tulabu, hadara, attended, ad-darsa, the lesson. Right? What does hadara mean?
He attended.
He attended. Right? That means he attended. But who was it? Who's the doer? At-tulabu. He attended is that singular, dual, plural, male or female?
Singular.
Singular male. Who's the one who's the doer? At-tulabu. Is that singular, dual, plural, male, female?
Could be plural or dual, isn't it?
No, that is,
Dual.
that's
Plural.
plural.
Alright.
At-tulabu is plural. Right? Ad-darsa is singular. So, what do we understand from the difference between hadara at-talib wa darsa and hadara at-tulab wa darsa? What is the only part of the sentence which has changed?
Tulabu. Student.
At-tulabu, the doer, the fa'ilun. Okay? That's the fa'ilun, isn't it? The fa'ilun. Or we'll call it al-fa'ilu, the doer. That's the doer. And it's changed. But hadara has remained the same. Even though in Arabic, if we add to our verb list here, katabu. Katabu is they wrote, plural male. They wrote, plural male. So if katabu is they wrote, plural male, what is they attended, plural male?
Hadaru.
Hadaru. Remember the pattern is the same. So we go from katabu to hadaru. Right? Arjan?
Yeah, sure.
But we're not using hadaru here, are we? We're using the singular. Right? Can you see that, Muhammad? Why are we using the singular? Because, as I said, when we begin the jumlatul fi'liyya, we begin with the singular when it's the third person. Regardless of whether our doer is singular, dual or plural, it doesn't matter. Right? So, what doesn't matter in our jumlatul fi'liyya? Well, what doesn't matter is al-fi'lu, the verb. Why does that matter? Because if our doer is female, then the verb has to be female too. Right? So, if there was a female student who attended, we can't say hadara. We have to say
Hadarat.
hadarat. Right? Hadarat. Hadarat. The student. What's the female student? At-talibatu. At-talibatu. The student, the lesson is ad-darsa. Okay? Okay? Hadarat at-talibatu ad-darsa. Okay? Now note that it becomes hadarat. Right? Because what from the rules of al-jumlatul fi'liyya is that the fa'ilun must match al-fi'lu in gender. Must match in gender. It doesn't matter if it doesn't match in number. Right? Because that's singular, that's singular. That's plural, that's singular. That's singular female, that's singular female. So if we mentioned the female students attended the lesson, then what do we begin with, akhlaq?
Hadarat.
المفعول به Hadarat, right. We begin with hadarat, don't we? We begin with hadarat. Right, how do we say the female students? We say talibatu. Talibatu ad-darsa. Right? Hadarat at-talibatu ad-darsa. Note that it's the same as hadara at-tulabu, isn't it? In the sense that that is what? Singular, dual, plural? It's plural. But hadarat is singular. Hadarat is singular, at-talibatu is plural, and that's singular, ad-darsa. But they match in what? What do they match in? Al-fa'ilu and al-fi'lu, in gender, because they have to. Right? You look confused, Muhammad.
No, I've got it.
The only issue here, right, and I wanted to mention this once the rule is clear, is that there's a rule in Arabic that states that two sukoons cannot meet, right? And you will see this all the time in Al-Quran. There's a sukoon on the lam, right? But it's not written. The reason why it's not written is because that is called min haruf al-shamsiyah. The ta is from haruf al-shamsiyah. That's why you don't say al-talibatu. You say at-talibatu, at-ta, right? You know there are certain, you will know this reading the Quran. Which is why the sukoon here becomes a kasra. So you say hadaratit talibatu ad-darsa. Hadaratit talibatu ad-darsa. Right? It just becomes a kasra. If there wasn't, because remember, as we said at the very beginning, most Arabic books don't have any vowel signs on them at all. Right? So when you read that sentence here, if you stop here and say hadarat, you would just say hadarat. Then you say at-talibatu, and then you say ad-darsa. But if you're going to read it continuously, you would say hadarat at-talibatu ad-darsa. It depends. We only write it on, and we only pronounce all the endings because we're learning grammar. And if we don't pronounce all the endings all the time, we don't know whether or not we're learning it correctly, do we? Which is why most of the Arabs, when they speak, what you'll notice is that they don't pronounce the endings. That's one of the differences between those who speak Fusha or the classical Arabic, is they place great emphasis upon the endings all the time. And one of the methods that the Arabs use in their colloquial speech to avoid the complexity of grammar in Arabic is they don't drop the ending. So you can imagine it's a lot easier if you don't have to worry about the ending. If you read this, if you read that sentence and you don't have to worry about the fa'ilun being marfu'un or the maf'ulun bihi being mansubun, it becomes easier, right? But whereas because we're learning, it's very important to always pronounce the ending. Okay, so that is what we wanted to mention with regards to al-fi'l al-madi for the moment. So in summary, therefore, it's very important to take one example of a verb, and you can use kataba or you can use fa'ala or daraba, whichever one is your favorite verb. You take it, you learn these different conjugations, and then you practice with other verbs. Right? And you learn how to conjugate each one straight away. So you pick a verb, jalasa, he sat, or akala, he ate, or shariba, he drank, and you can go through them all straight away. And it doesn't take long to memorize them. But if you do it now, you'll find that you learn far easier and more quickly than if you don't. Because if you don't learn them, then you're forever trying to do two things. One, understand the sentence. Two, understand what conjugation the verb is. And it all becomes confusing. Whereas if you look at it straight away and you know, right, that's third person she, it becomes easier. Right? Okay, any questions on here?
I've got one question.
Yes, Muhammad.
You mentioned the two spoons.
Sorry, mention?
Two spoons.
Yes.
When you say that, does that mean two spoons right next to each other? Or?
Yeah, right, because it's easier. It's easier if I use this example. It's clearer because if I say, for example, the girl ate the apple. Right. Akala is he ate. Akala. So Rajan, how do we say she ate?
أكلت.
Akalat. Right? Akalat. She ate. Akala is he ate. So now you know akalat is she ate, you should be able to change all of them. Right? So we want to say the girl ate the apple. Akalat, we begin with she ate. What goes next here, Akhlaq?
The girl.
The girl. The girl is Muhammad
Bintu?
al-bintu. Al-bintu. The apple is التفاحة. On that point, التفاحة, many people think that apple is التفاح or تفاحٌ, but that's plural apples. Singular is this with a ta marbuta. Many people make that mistake. Now, your question, the two sukoons together. Can you see now that the two sukoons are together? But now somebody can say, but what's on the alif here? The alif on here is called al-hamzatul wasl. Now, because al-hamzatul wasl means the hamza of connection, meaning the one you don't pronounce. Now in the Quran you'll see it all the time, but there's a particular symbol which is used, which is that. You'll find that on top of the alif and you don't pronounce it, right? But in normal, but that's specific to Al-Quran. In normal Arabic you just don't write anything, right? You don't write anything. You leave it like that. So the two sukoons are together because that alif doesn't carry any vowel. Right? Now, so because you can't have a meeting, right, of two sukoons, that therefore becomes akala til bintu at-tufahata. Right? Can you see that?
Yeah.
The reason why you don't, as I said, you don't place the sukoon there because you don't pronounce it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So it's clearer in this example because ba min huruf al-qamariyya, it's from the moon letters, which you do pronounce the lam. So what I was going to say is that when we discuss the present tense verb, you'll find that it has a hamzatul qat on the first person, such as aktubu. أكتب. Can you see this hamzatul qat? That's called hamzatul qat on there. Right? So it is pronounced. But here it's not. Any other questions?